Yes, Your Honor.
Is the defense ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. You may begin with your opening.
May it please the court?
Yes.
Opposing counsel? No! Whimpering. Those are the last noises that were heard from Barry Schmalbach's apartment on July 19th, 2023. An apartment that he shared with the defendant, Christopher Davis. What follows that slamming, the no, and whimpering, is the defendant doing a search on his cell phone for Walmart near me. Going to Walmart, and at Walmart, buying chocolate milk, not one, but 2 rolls of duct tape, and a 12-foot by 24-foot heavy-duty tarp. Today you're going to hear about the victim, Barry Schmalbach, as well as the defendant, Christopher Davis. You're going to hear that Barry, as he was known to friends, was loved. He was always in communication with them. He called them. He texted him. He was never not next to his phone. Quick responses. Even if he was in a different country, he still would get a hold of them. You'll hear that he was meticulous about keeping everything clean. His car, which he basically would say he lived out of mostly, as well as his house. He was not someone to be okay with items that were in disarray or being a mess. Barry was from Chicago and moved down to Florida in 2022. But he still kept friends in Chicago. He kept in communication with one of his best friends, Rosalie Malico. You'll hear that he had some medical issues, and because of the medical issues, he lost about 100 pounds. And he was walking daily. A walk that the defendant started joining him on when they met in May of 2023. They met at a Cinco de Mayo party, and within weeks, the defendant and the victim were living together. And members of the jury, within 2.5 months, the victim was gone. There's been no activity on the victim's accounts, his cell phone, his financial records, nothing, since July 19th, 2023. And the person that saw the victim last, the defendant, Christopher Davis. You will hear from a multitude of witnesses, one of them being Miguel Blanco. Miguel Blanco was one of Barry's closest friends here. You'll hear that they met working at Restaurant Depot, and they kept in communication for years, even moving down to Florida. You'll hear that Miguel actually had a key to Barry's condo due to the fact of Barry having the heart condition. You'll hear that Miguel had to tell the defendant to file a missing persons report, and that Miguel actually had to file one himself. And members of the jury, you're going to hear over and over again as the state brings you a multitude of photographs, videos, and other items and testimony from Miguel as well as other people that Barry is not in any of the photos. He is not in any of the videos. The person that is the defendant, Christopher Davis. You are going to hear that over and over and over and over again, whether it be in Walmart, Target, Ace Hardware, or disposing of evidence. That is what you are going to hear. Now, to explain the investigation, we have a retired detective. His name is Bryce Bierman. He was with the Cape Coral Police Department until 2024. This is one of his last cases that he worked. And he is going to come today, as well as the rest of this week, and he is going to explain to you, day by day, by day, by day, the actions that the defendant took after he killed Barry. Now, members of the jury, you are not going to see Barry's body. You are not going to be hearing from a medical examiner in this case. We don't have a body. What we do have are the defendant's actions. the defendant buying duct tape, neighbors witnessing something heavy being moved. Sounds like a plastic tarp. The defendant buying air fresheners, renting an Airbnb, buying a pickaxe, buying a shovel, disclosing of those items, and giving a multitude of stories. Stories that all conflict. So if we begin with July 19th, you're going to hear from witnesses, such as Ruth, who's a neighbor. You're going to hear from a Lyft driver who took Barry and the defendant to a place called Cruisers. It's a bar in the Cape. You're going to hear that while at the bar at the Cape, he texted his friend Rosalie and said, "I'm at the bar with my BF, but I am so done with the BS. Please call me tomorrow. I miss you so much." Then you're going to hear a couple hours later, Rosalie got a text back. And it didn't make sense. It didn't sound like something Barry would send her. And you'll hear what that response was and how she knew it wasn't Barry that sent it. You're going to hear from a bartender as well as another patron who'll say that it looked like something was amiss between Barry as well as the defendant. They didn't leave at the same time. Barry paid and then left, and then Chris was in a different room, and then shortly there followed. And you'll actually see videos of the defendant and the victim walking back to the condo at 1835 Beach Parkway, Unit 303, a third-story condo complex with the top floor being where Barry lived. You'll also hear that during that walk back, Barry called Miguel Blanco, his friend. The last voicemail that we have from Barry is given to Miguel. "Give me a call. I need your help. I got to get rid of this fucking idiot. I can't take it anymore." That is what Barry told Miguel before the defendant, Christopher Davis, is heard slamming Barry against the wall. No, no, whimpering, and then silence. And members of the jury, you're going to hear that because Kim Zanzatani, who lives in the apartment underneath Barry and Chris, hears that. She hears the slamming. She hears the no, no, and she hears the whimpering, and then silence. Chirp, chirp, for Barry's Jeep being opened. You're going to see the actual video of the defendant walking into Walmart, buying the duct tape, buying the tarp. And what's interesting is he pays for cash in these items. Then you'll hear about July 20th, the next day. You'll hear that Detective Bierman will explain to you that Barry is not seen or heard from on the 20th at all. The last known message out is about 8:30 the day before, p.m. Nothing after that. No digital footprint, nothing. The only thing you see is the defendant driving Barry's Jeep, using Barry's credit cards, making up stories that conflict with one another. You'll hear that Barry had an iWatch that he wore all the time. You'll see the defendant in a lot of the videos and photographs wearing Barry's iWatch. You'll also see that the defendant does multiple searches for Airbnbs. And members of the jury, he lives in a condo in Cape Coral, and he's doing Airbnb searches in Fort Myers, Lehigh Acres, Cape Coral, Naples, North Fort Myers. And then you'll also hear that he did a search for a place called Ochapi, which is kind of in the Everglades, a very rural, marshy area. But ultimately, he finds a place in Clewiston. Clewiston, members of the jury, is in Glades County. You're going to hear that Clewiston is kind of like old Florida. There's briars, there's bushes, there's palm trees. It is overgrown, and there's not a lot out there, especially in the area where he ends up renting a place, Montura. Montura is acre and a half lots. Some of them have a house on them. Most of them don't. When you walk through them, you get cut up. The briars get you, the sticks, whatever it may be. It is rural Florida. But before he does that, what you are going to hear is that on the 20th, he also calls Discover Credit Card Company, which is a company that Barry has a credit card from. You'll actually see a photo of the credit card. It's a Blackhawks NHL credit card, Barry being from Chicago. And he'll use that credit card at Starbucks, which was Barry and Chris's normal place to stop. And you'll hear from one of the employees say that when she asked where Barry was, Chris's response was, working. Then you'll see Chris go to Lowe's and buy a hand truck, which is a dolly, basically, to move heavy items, fridges, boxes, whatever heavy items you have. Then he goes to Target. He uses the victim's Discover card again. Barry is still nowhere in sight, and he tries to withdraw money from an ATM. And then you'll end the day with a phone call from PNC Bank. It is one of the banking institutions that Barry uses. And members of the jury, listen carefully during that phone call. That phone call is not made by Barry. It's made by the defendant. Listen how, when the woman that is working for the bank asks him for his social security number, he waits. "11 seconds before he's able to give her his social security number. When asked what his mother's maiden name is, he gives the first name a couple times. Pauses, kind of makes small talk before giving the name again, as well as his phone number. You're going to hear from two different witnesses, Miguel as well as Kim, who are going to tell you, that's not Barry's voice, that's the defendant. That is the defendant's voice on that call. Nowhere in that call is Barry's voice. You're going to hear about July 21st in the wee hours, about 4 a.m., from one of the other neighbors, who hears what sounds like something moving on a heavy tarp. You're going to hear that he looked outside, saw movement, saw somebody dragging something, and then he's going to say that it matched Christopher, the defendant, his gait, the way he acts, the way he moves. You're going to hear that light bulbs were unscrewed, and those light bulbs that turn the lights off, they matched Christopher's fingerprints. You're also going to hear about black tubs that the defendant was carrying back up to the condo. And these tubs are important because when we go to Montura's Airbnb, those tubs are also found. You're going to hear about the defendant then going to put gas in Barry's Jeep, buying air fresheners in Walmart, and then driving to an Airbnb in Montura. Again, this is Clewiston. And he rents that Airbnb under the name Tyler Gamble. Not his name, under somebody else's name. And you're going to notice and see that the Jeep he is driving all the way to Montura is on what is known as LPRs, which are license plate readers. And the detective is going to explain to you that a license plate reader is going to take a picture of the license plate as well as the vehicle. And you'll see the vehicle is spotless on the outside. What you'll notice, though, is the next day, the vehicle now has dirt and mud all over it after being in Montura Ranches. Now that Airbnb, how I described Montura, it's just like that. Wooded, overgrown areas, needle in the haystack. That's where he rented an Airbnb. An hour and a half away from Cape Coral. Well, he gets to Clewiston, and he goes to Ace Hardware. He goes to a bank, gets money from an ATM using Barry's information again. When he goes to the Ace Hardware, he buys a pickaxe and a shovel. Then, his phone doesn't have any data usage for 3 hours. From approximately 12 p.m. until 3 p.m., there are no text messagings, phone calls, searches, nothing from the defendant after buying a pickaxe and a shovel. You're going to hear that when his phone stopped having communication with it, he was at the Airbnb. But 3 hours later, he's about 10 minutes away when it comes back on. 3 hours that are unaccounted for. The Airbnb host is actually going to testify that she saw clothing hanging off the banisters at the Airbnb, which she thought was weird because he only rented it for one night. That's not normal. But you'll hear a lot of not normal about that Airbnb. You're also going to hear that the defendant's cell phone goes quiet again from 6 p.m. on the 21st until 11 a.m. on the 22nd. There are searches, but there's not phone calls, and they're very few and far between, those searches. While Christopher is in Clewiston himself, Miguel and his partner Tom, they go and check on Barry because they've been calling, they haven't heard from him. They have a key to the house, so they go in. There's packages outside, they bring the packages in, and what do they see? The inside of Barry's condo is a mess. That's not how Barry would have kept it. And then you'll hear about the 22nd. The Airbnb host that rented a place to Tyler Gamble sees the defendant running and knows that this is the defendant because he's oversharing with her. He's telling her, oh, I'm going for a run, and then I'm going to check out, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. And you are going to hear from her as she tells you what he told her. And that Tyler Gamble in the photo is not Tyler Gamble. It's the defendant, Christopher Davis. Now that Airbnb, she's going to tell you that when she went into it to clean it, because her and her mom own it together and they clean it before they rent it out to the next person, they notice things that don't make sense. There's a ton of debris inside. There's sand everywhere. There's areas that are matted down. Furniture has been moved around. Stuff that's not normal for her normal people to come visit for a night, especially somebody that's there by themselves. As the defendant is driving back to Cape Coral, Miguel will tell you that he urged the defendant to file a missing persons report and ended up filing a report himself. But what does the defendant do before filing a missing persons report? He goes to the Ace Hardware in Cape Coral. You'll see the video of the defendant doing this, driving Barry's Jeep right up to a dumpster, pulling out a pickaxe and a shovel and throwing them away. Within 24 hours of buying a pickaxe and a shovel, the defendant threw them away. He then calls law enforcement, tells them Barry's missing, and he's kind of worried about him. You'll hear that actual 911, you hear the 911 call that he made, where he's oversharing and telling the dispatcher all sorts of information that seems like it's too much. It's weird. And then you'll also actually see the body-worn cam with the officer that talks to the defendant that day. You'll hear that later that night, Becky Weber, who's one of the neighbors, she'll testify that Chris was worried. He said things like, I'm worried, I think Barry is going to leave me and kick me out, and asked Becky to come help him look for Barry's phone. When she looks for Barry's phone, she goes into the apartment, or condo I should say, and she sees a wallet. And it's Barry's wallet she sees. She knows it's Barry's wallet because, again, Barry is very meticulous. He has everything in a certain spot in his wallet. Every card is a certain way. The way he is everything is perfect. Now, after the 22nd, when the defendant is finally reported missing, when the victim is finally reported missing by the defendant had called him a few times since then, off and on. But after he's reported missing, there's not a single phone call that the defendant makes to Barry's phone. Then you'll hear about July 23rd, where the defendant starts looking up history on the web for how to reset a Century Safe code, how to find a Century Safe factory code and reset the combo. Searches where to buy that exact same safe. This is a safe that Barry had in his condo. The exact same safe in his condo is what the defendant is looking to buy and looking to crack open. Now, the fingerprints of the defendant are actually found when law enforcement goes on the back panel of the safe that Barry has. The only way that you're going to hear to do that is to actually take off the front of code key panel. And that's what the defendant did. You're going to watch a video of the defendant pushing a safe out of Home Depot. He's also going to be having a swing bar guard lock, which is when you go to a hotel, you have those locks that kind of go over and clasp, so if somebody tries to come in, it'll block them. You're also going to hear that he bought basically a new lock for a door. Well, if Barry's missing, wouldn't Barry need to get back into the condo? After he buys this, he buys it with the Discover card of Barry's, not his own. And he calls the number for Century Safe. You'll hear back on the 24th that the defendant goes to Starbucks. And while at Starbucks, he talks to Cindy Thomas again. But this time, Barry's missing and it must be a hate crime. He's only been missing for a day or two. Well, we're on the 24th. A day or two is when he filed the missing persons report. But again, nobody has heard or seen from Barry since the 19th. You're going to hear that after he goes to Starbucks, the defendant calls a place called Anna Teresa Aesthetic Medicine. And he makes an appointment. He makes an appointment to get fillers in his face. He gets Sculptra, which builds over time, which is a type of filler, as well as a filler for his lips. Now, what's interesting about that is that on middle of May, he makes his initial consult with them. He puts his address as the address with Barry, as well as he does not put Barry's name on his emergency contact, but he puts the address. But 2 days after he reports his boyfriend missing, he makes an appointment for cosmetic fillers. And guess how he pays for those fillers? With Barry's credit card. Over $1,400 in fillers. You're also going to hear that the detectives do a search warrant. They do a search warrant on the defendant's phone. They do a search warrant on the house. They do the search warrant on the defendant. They do a search warrant on anything. And what do they find? Well, what they don't find is a body, but they do find that he has scratches all over his body in the stages of healing. Kind of similar to if you're walking around the woods in Montura. You're also going to hear that when they ask him about the scratches, he says, I was trying to put a harness on my cat. That's where the scratches are from. You're going to see pictures of the Jeep with cleaning supplies in it. Air fresheners. Air fresheners he bought a couple days before at Walmart. You'll see the video of that too. You're also going to see and hear from friends and family, such as Barry's close friend, Leo Gianchetti, who also is the victim's power of attorney, and will tell you the last time Barry used his card is when Chris was using it. And Barry's not one to give a credit card out. Barry would sometimes give cash, but never a credit card. And you'll hear that over and over again from all of his friends and family. You're going to hear the detective state that he spoke to the defendant, and the defendant said when he got home from Cruisers, he went straight to sleep, and when he woke up at 4 a.m., Barry was gone. Well, that's weird because we see him multiple times. We see him on a video in Walmart. We see him making or hear him making phone calls. You're going to hear multiple discrepancies in the defendant's story of what happened to Barry. You're also going to hear that on July 28th, Barry's wallet was found. The same wallet Kim saw when she went to go help the defendant a few days earlier. And where it's found is a storm drain. A storm drain that is on the walking path for Barry and Chris. It has a bunch of Barry's credit cards in it, but not all of them. Because most of the other credit cards, when they did a search warrant of Chris in the condo, those credit cards were in Chris's wallet. Barry Schmalbach, Barry Schmalbach, Barry Schmalbach, over and over again. Not a single credit card in that wallet had Chris's name on it. They were all Barry's. Also inside that wallet was his identification card, Barry's. Inside that safe is his passport. Barry didn't leave, members of the jury. And that's what the state will prove to you today. You're not going to hear from a medical examiner. You're not going to hear a body. I see a body, excuse me. what you are going to see and hear is the defendant buying duct tape, a tarp, air fresheners, pickaxe and shovels, renting an Airbnb in a rural, remote area, and the defendant's own conflicting statements, using the victim's credit cards for his own will, as well as all the actions he took up until the point that the search warrants were served. At the end of the trial, the state will come back to you and ask for the only just verdict in this case, a verdict of guilt for the crimes of second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and 8 counts of fraudulent use or possession of personal identifying information of a deceased person. Thank you.
All right. Vince?
Thank you. May it please the court, counsel.